Pleasure to have you all with us today. A special mention to a couple of our guests here today, Dr. Harsha De Silva, Advocata's chairman, Mr. Murtaza, the Deputy Ambassador of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, Ms. Anouk Barron, and our esteemed panelists and moderator, as well as our keynote speaker. Thank you all so much for joining us today. It's great to host you today. In our efforts for a greener future, the agenda can be accessed through the QR code, which will be displayed on the screen in just a minute. There you go. The entire agenda for the event is here, so please feel free to go ahead and scan this QR code. To commence the proceedings, I would now like to invite Tatsarni Sirivadana, Research Assistant at the Advocata Institute, to give us an introduction for today's event. Tatsarni.
Ladies and gentlemen, we take great pleasure in launching the Women's Policy Action Network this evening. Dr. Roshan Pereira, representing the Women's Policy Action Network, will provide a detailed synopsis of its core mission and objectives. However, as a young woman with lots of aspirations and dreams making her way through the crossroads of Sri Lanka's labor force, I would like to ask you this question. How do we empower women? Well, the answer really is that creating an economic system that meets the aspirations of all women. This can also be the single growth accelerator before our ailing crisis-ridden economy. Empowering women goes a long way, and it is a long road, but it can start now. The Women Policy Action Network is such an initiative that hopes to make a ripple effect in long and crucial journey of empowering women so that your aspiration and dreams as a female entrepreneur, as a business leader, a professional, a mother, a sister, a daughter becomes a reality. A reality that can also drive our nation to an era of growth and economic prosper. With this thought in mind, I invite you to join hands with the Women's Policy Action Network and make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tatsarni. On behalf of the Netherlands Embassy, we welcome Ms. Anouk Barron to the podium to give her remarks.
Yes, thank you for giving me that opportunity, and good evening or afternoon, everybody. Because today is an important moment, I think, for us as the Netherlands Embassy, because we're proud to actually support this initiative. Today, Advocata is launching the Women's Policy Action Network, which is, of course, part of their works towards creating a robust policy action group that can advocate for change. And Sri Lanka is going through a lot of change. You have a much better understanding and vision on where that should be going. But what we as the Netherlands Embassy find important is that women's visions are part of that change that Sri Lanka is going through, will be going through. And that makes this a very fundamental and timely topic. Women's economic empowerment, like you were also saying, and what are the barriers that need to be addressed? Because in the Netherlands too, it is sometimes something that has been very important to us for a long time. Many steps have been taken, but actually, despite the progress, it is still work in progress. And back home, as in Sri Lanka, women have always played an important role in society, but it's not reflected at the decision table and in processes of change. So even though women make up half of the world's population, it is rare to find a place where they are equally represented in places where decisions are made, also about their own lives. And in the Netherlands, we are trying to address this through a new policy lens in our foreign policy. Equality is actually one of the cornerstones of the Dutch constitution, and that is why the government is now actively pursuing a feminist foreign policy. So what does that actually mean? And ultimately, it's connected to why we support this initiative of Advocata. While promoting women's rights and gender equality has been a key focus of the Dutch foreign policy for a long time, it is actually only in recent months that we put it into action in various ways and also started to call it that way. Feminist foreign policy means to us that we are protecting human rights and promoting meaningful participation in decision-making by women, but also the LGBTIQ+ community. The vision of our feminist foreign policy are the 4 R's. So that's rights, representation, resources, and reality check. Women all over the world, they must be able to claim their universal rights and know that they are safeguarded from violence. So that's where rights comes in. Then they must be represented and take part in the political decisions. That's where representation comes in. There must be sufficient resources to actually achieve those goals, resources. And then circumstances, they differ all around the world, and a particular approach will not have the same effect everywhere. And it's the local communities, the women and men in that local communities, I'm also calling out men, who have to drive that locally. So we have to implement our policy goals in a way that is appropriate and driven by the local context. That's what we call the reality check. So why is that important to the Netherlands? I think ultimately quite simply because if more people have equal opportunities, we will have a safer, more stable and more prosperous world. And advocating for women is advocating for a better and prosperous country. And as Sri Lanka is embarking on a reform agenda, I cannot think of a better time to launch this policy action network in Sri Lanka, which is why we decided to support it. Because as long as the rights of women and girls remain uncertain, they will face discrimination, including in financial and legal terms, unequal access to property, land, inheritances, loan and education. And that violates the right of women and children, exposing them to poverty, dependence and violence. So to work towards progress is to answering ultimately philosophical questions. What needs to change? What more needs to be done now? We have looked at the progress of women in many areas, the right to vote, women's education, women in the workforce, women on boards. And these are all very important matrices, but there remain cultural, social, and structural hurdles, and we need to deal with those too. For example, in the Netherlands, we have 1/3 of the members of the Dutch parliament being women. I actually think only 1/3. And as opposed to Sri Lanka, we have never had a prime minister who is female. So we also have a lot to do. Women are still severely underrepresented in policy making and in the political system around the world, and they have fewer economic opportunities to men. That is because in many ways and in many processes we are not applying a gendered perspective. And a society that does not recognize the equal position of women in practice is a society which can never live up to its potential. So as Advocaata's work in this area will examine a basis for evidence-based policy reform, I hope that you, an active and influential audience, will support and contribute to the solutions, not in terms of accepting differentials and then seeing what can be done to correct that, but instead of starting accepting equality, and any differential treatment then has to be justified. So equality must just not be formal, but be substantive and take into account the unique challenges that women face locally and the specific effects that policies have on them to truly level the playing field. Start with accepting equality, and any differential treatment then has to be justified. So in closing, I would like to thank my colleagues, especially Shanila, who together with the Advocaata team behind the scenes did everything to get this going.